There are moments in Imperium when survival demands more than courage, more than faith, more than loyalty. Moments when a child feels a world tear open inside their skull before they even understand what the Emperor is. When voices arrive uninvited, carrying memories that are not theirs, screaming truths that no human mind was ever meant to hold. In those moments, the Imperium does not see a person. It sees a resource, a volatile one, a necessary one. Psykers are not chosen because they are strong. They are chosen because they are dangerous, and Imperium has decided that danger is cheaper to spend than fear. Every sanctioned Psyker is a wound wrapped in ritual, a living breach held shut by prayer and threat. They are told they serve the Emperor. What they are never told is how much of themselves will be burned away before that service is complete. If you find value in stories that explore the hidden cost behind Imperium survival, consider supporting this channel by liking the video, sharing it with others who walk the grimdark paths of Warhammer 40K, and subscribing so you don't miss what the Imperium prefers to keep unspoken. It never begins with power. That is a lie people tell afterward, once the fear has been repackaged into something noble. The first awakening is smaller, uglier, and far more intimate. It begins with a headache that does not fade, a pressure behind the eyes that no amount of sleep will ease. Sounds arrive too loudly, layered atop one another, until voices blur into a single, scraping noise. The air feels wrong, thick and electric, as if the world itself has grown tense. A child does not know the word Psyker. They only know that something inside them has started pushing outward, and it will not stop. At first, the changes are easy to miss. A cup rattles on a table when emotions spike. Shadows linger half a second too long after the sun moves on. Dreams grow crowded, filled with faces that do not belong to anyone the child has ever met. These moments pass quickly, dismissed by exhausted parents or frightened caretakers as illness, imagination, or bad luck. In the Imperium, there is always another explanation ready, because the truth is more dangerous than ignorance. To recognize a Psyker is to invite the attention of forces no household can survive alone. As the awakening deepens, privacy becomes impossible. Thoughts no longer stay where they are meant to. Anger bleeds into the room like heat from an open furnace. Fear sharpens, projecting itself outward in invisible waves that unsettle animals and make adults uneasy without knowing why. The child learns to stay quiet, to swallow emotion, to shrink inward in the hope that whatever is happening might star without attention. It does not. The warp is not fed by courage or weakness. It is fed by existence itself. There is a moment most Psykers remember for the rest of their shortened lives. The moment when the world answers back. A scream that shatters glass. A door that slams hard enough to crack stone. A sudden stillness, as if time itself has flinched. The child stands at the center of it, shaking, ears ringing, heart racing so hard it hurts. Nothing feels triumphant. There is only the certainty that something irreversible has occurred. Whatever they were before, they are not that anymore. After that moment, fear changes shape. It is no longer vague. It acquires direction. The child begins to notice the way adults look at them when they think they are not being watched. Conversations stop when they enter a room. Prayers are whispered more often and always a little louder. In some places, superstition takes over quickly. A village blames bad harvests on the child's presence. A manufacturer in Havelock whispers about cursed blood. In better circumstances, families try to hide the signs, locking doors, avoiding officials, hoping distance will be enough. It never is. The Imperium has trained its people well. Even on world where education is scarce and hunger constant, everyone knows the warnings. Witches draw the attention of demons. Uncontrolled Psykers doom entire populations. Mercy is dangerous. These truths are taught not as philosophy, but as survival instinct. When fear finally outweighs love, the choice is made quickly. A report is filed. A local authority is informed. Sometimes it is framed as protection, sometimes as duty, sometimes as relief. The child is never consulted. By the time the first official arrives, the Psyker has already learned the most important lesson of their existence. Power does not make them special. It makes them exposed. They feel the warp constantly now, a distant roar like an ocean pressing against fragile walls. Sleep brings no rest, only half-formed impressions clawing for attention. Waking life offers no escape either. Every strong emotion threatens to become an incident. Every mistake risks drawing something, and that will not leave quietly. This is a stage the Imperium never shows in its sermons. Before sanctioning, before robes and brands and control collars, before service is framed as honor. This is where Psykers live longest, paradoxically, because they have not yet been made useful. They are raw nerve endings wrapped in flesh. Try and survive long enough to understand what is happening to them. Most do not. Some are killed by frightened neighbors. Others lose control in moments of panic and are executed immediately. A few last long enough to hear the name of the thing they are becoming. When the black ships finally come, they do not arrive as salvation. They arrive as confirmation. Confirmation that the fear was justified. Confirmation that the Imperium has been watching all along. Confirmation that whatever small, fragile life the Psyker once had is already over. By then, the child has learned another truth, one no catechism ever admits aloud. The Emperor may protect, but first he consumes. The waiting is worse than the awakening. Once the signs are undeniable, time stretches into something cruel and elastic, each day heavy with the knowledge that it may be the last one lived in any recognizable form. The Psyker learns to measure hours by restraint rather than routine. How long can they keep their thoughts quiet? How long before the pressure builds again? How long before fear slips and something answers back? Every success feels temporary. Every failure feels fatal. In the spaces where control falters, the warp presses closer, not as voices at first, but as sensations that do not belong to the body. Cold where there is no wind. Weight on the chest with no source. A taste of iron when no blood has been spilled. The Psyker learns that the Imperium does not announce itself clearly. It insinuates. It leaks through cracks in concentration, through moment of exhaustion, through grief that cannot be expressed without consequence. The danger is not curiosity. It is vulnerability. Those around the Psyker adapt in their own ways. Some grow harsh, believing discipline will contain what fear cannot. Others become distant, speaking less, touching less, as the proximity itself might invite disaster. In the worst cases, cruelty masquerades as prevention. A child is beaten for crying too loudly, locked away when emotions spike, starved of contact in the hope that isolation will starve the power as well. It never works. The warp does not care how alone you are. If anything, it prefers it. There are Psykers who learn to lie convincingly. They suppress reactions, mask incidents, deflect suspicion with practiced normalcy. These are the ones who last longest, not because they are safer, but because they are quieter. Silence becomes armor. Emotional numbness becomes survival strategy. They learn to feel less, because feeling risks catastrophe. In this way, the Imperium's work begins long before the black ships arrive. The Psyker is already being hollowed out by necessity. On worlds closer to the core, there are institutions meant to catch awakenings early. Scholastia's Icona outposts, local authorities trained to recognize the signs. On frontier worlds, detection is cruder. A mob with faith and fear is often the first response. Burnings still happen. Executions framed as purification still occur. The Imperium tolerates this inefficiency because the alternative is worse. A living Psyker is a risk. A dead one is not. When capture comes officially, it is procedural and impersonal. Restraint collars snap, close with practice efficiency. Sedatives are administered without explanation. The Psyker is cataloged, measured, reduced to data points on a slate that does not record their name unless absolutely necessary. They are no longer a person in crisis. They are a threat in transit. Any resistance is interpreted not as panic, but as proof of danger. During transport to the black ships, the Psyker becomes acutely aware of others like them. Some are younger, some older, some broken already, rocking silently, eyes unfocused. Others stare with an intensity that makes looking back feel unsafe. Their control stretched thin by proximity to so many uncontrolled minds. The air feels charged, unstable. Guards avoid eye contact, hands never far from weapons calibrated to kill instantly. There is no reassurance offered. Reassurance implies choice. This is when many Psykers realize the truth they were never meant to articulate. The Imperium does not save them from the warp. It saves everyone else from them. Any protection they receive is incidental, a side effect of containment. Service, if it comes, will not be an elevation. It will be a leash, justified by the simple fact that a leash monster is preferable to a loose one. By the time the black ship's shadows fall across the world, the Psyker's fear has exhausted itself into something quieter and heavier. Acceptance, perhaps, or resignation. The awakening is over. The first lesson has been learned. Power is not a gift. It is a debt, and the Imperium has come to collect. The black ships do not descend like invaders. They arrive with the calm certainty of something expected, their hulls blotting out the sky with bureaucratic indifference. There is no drama in their landing, no thunderous proclamation, only the quiet reordering of reality as authority asserts itself. Streets are sealed. Voxcasters repeat compliance codes in flat, emotionless tones. The Psyker feels a change before they see it, a sudden tightening in the air, as if the world itself has decided to hold its breath. Once aboard, time loses its meaning. The ship's corridors are narrow, dimly lit, and lined with words etched so deeply into the metal, they seem grown rather than engraved. The warp recedes here, not because it is banished, but because it is suppressed, forced into a low, constant pressure that never fully relents. It is like breathing with a weight on the chest. The Psyker is never allowed to forget what they are, but they are also never allowed to express it. Silence becomes mandatory. Restraint becomes routine. Names are taken first. Not ceremonially, but efficiently. Identification is reduced to numeric designations. Easier to log, easier to forget. The Psyker's history, their family, their origin world, all become irrelevant data points once the threat has been isolated. What matters now is stability, potential, and survivability. The rest can be reconstructed later, if necessary. Usually it is not. The journey to the void is long, but the length is deliberately obscured. Sedatives blur memory, lighting cycles without reference to external time. Meals are tasteless nutrient blocks, dispensed on schedules that discourage conversation. Psykers are kept apart not for comfort, but for control. Proximity amplifies instability. Shared fear resonates too easily through the warp. Isolation keeps the damage contained. Those who cannot endure the suppression begin to fail quickly. Nosebleeds become seizures. Whispers turn to screams muffled by force fields and dampening fields. Some Psykers simply stop responding, their minds collapsing inward under strain of being constantly restrained. These failures are noted without comment. Bodies are removed. The compartments are cleaned. The ship continues on its route without deviation. Loss is expected. It has already been accounted for. For those who remain conscious, the black ship becomes a lesson in scale. This is not a rescue operation. It is an industry. Thousands of Psykers are processed, categorized, and routed with the same efficiency used to move ammunition or promethium. The Psyker realizes they are not rare. They are abundant enough to be spent. Whatever fate awaits them, it will not hinge on mercy. Some attempt prayer. Others cling to memories of home, replaying faces and voices until they begin to blur. A few reach instinctively for the warp despite the pain, desperate to feel something familiar, only to be punished by feedback so severe it leaves them shaking and mute. The message is clear and consistent. Survival now depends on submission. The black ships do not threaten. They do not need to. Their existence is threat enough. Every corridor, every restraint, every warded bulkhead reinforces the same truth. The Imperium has already decided that whatever the Psyker becomes next will be less important than the fact that they are no longer free. By the time terror is named, spoken in reverent monotone by a voice that does not expect reaction, the Psyker has learned to stop hoping for outcomes. Hope implies preference. Preference implies disappointment. All that remains is transit, carried toward a future that has already been categorized, priced, and deemed acceptable. The longer the black ship travels, the more the Psyker understands that it is not merely a vessel, but a filter. Those who survive do so not because they are strong, but because they are compatible. Compatibility here does not mean resilience or courage. It means a specific kind of breakage. the ability to be bent without shattering, to endure constant suppression without pushing back hard enough to draw fatal attention. The ship teaches this lesson patiently, through repetition and consequence. Guards move through the tension decks in silence, faces hidden behind sealed helms marked with the Imperial Aquila. They do not speak unless necessary. Speech invites recognition, and recognition invites empathy. Empathy has no place here. When discipline is enforced, it is done with tools designed for immediacy. Neural shocks, no field pulses, measures that incapacitate, without spectacle. The Psyker learns to associate resistance not with defiance, but with pain so precise it feels instructional. At irregular intervals, examinations occur. Psykana adepts and sanctioned officials observe from behind layered fields. Their voices distorted, their questions reduced to prompts rather than conversation. The Psyker is tested for stability, responsiveness, and depth of connection to the warp. Some are marked quietly for termination, others for training. A few are flagged for purposes never explained. The Psyker is never told which category they fall into. Knowledge would change behavior, and behavior is being measured. It is during these examinations that many Psykers feel the first true severing of self. Memories are probed not for comfort, but for leverage. Emotional anchors are identified, cataloged, and later stripped away through conditioning. Love is dangerous. Attachment creates instability. The Imperium does not forbid these things out of cruelty, but out of efficiency. A Psyker who has nothing left to lose is easier to aim. Between assessments, the ship hums with restrained potential. Hundreds of minds exist in close proximity, each dampened, each isolated, yet still aware of one another on some instinctive level. Dreams bleed together in fragments. Nightmares echo faintly through the wards, never forming clearly enough to be shared, but persistent enough to erode rest. The Psyker learns that even silence can be crowded. Occasionally, a scream cuts through the suppression fields, sharp enough to carry. It never lasts long. Afterwards, the ship grows quieter, as if absorbing the sound. No explanations are offered. None are needed. The Psyker understands that not everyone aboard will disembark. Some will be consumed by the journey itself, reduced to cautionary data points that reinforce compliance in the rest. By the time Terra's gravity will begin to assert itself, the Psyker's sense of identity has been eroded to its barest outline. They remember their name only because they repeat it silently, afraid that if they stop, it will vanish entirely. They remember their face imperfectly. Home feels like a story heard long ago, no longer anchored to emotion. This is not accidental. The Imperium does not want recruits who remember being anything else. When the black ship finally docks, there is no sense of arrival, only transfer. Restraints are checked. Designations are confirmed. The Psyker is moved from one controlled environment to another without ever touching open air. Terror exists as pressure and distance, felt but never seen. The heart of the Imperium does not reveal itself to those it intends to use. As the gangways seal behind them, the Psyker realizes that the most violent act has already occurred. They have not been beaten into submission. They have been emptied. Whatever comes next will be built atop that emptiness, shaped according to the Imperium's needs rather than their own. The black ship withdraws, its task complete. It leaves behind not survivors, but inventory, sorted and ready for distribution. And somewhere in the vast machinery of the Imperium, the Psyker's future is selected, not as destiny, but as allocation. Sanctioning is spoken of as a beginning, but it is experienced as an ending. By the time the Psyker is led into the chambers of the Scholastia Psykana, there is little left that resembles the person who first felt the warp stir inside their skull. What remains is raw potential contained by exhaustion, fear, and carefully cultivated emptiness. The Imperium does not mistake this state for weakness. It relies on it. The chamber is cold, not in temperature, but in intent. Every surface is etched with wards layered, so densely they blur into a single oppressive pattern. The air tastes metallic, tinged with incense burned not to soothe, but to obscure. The Psyker is restrained, not because resistance is expected, but because ritual demands it. Control must be visible. Control must be absolute. Somewhere beyond the Psyker's sight, robed figures observe through lenses that filter out individuality. reducing the subject to a problem to be solved. Sanctioning begins with pain, because pain is reliable. The Psyker's connection to warp is pulled taut, stretched until every uncontrolled impulse becomes agony. They are taught, in the most direct way possible, that power used without permission will be punished instantly, not later, not abstractly, instantly. This conditioning is not subtle. It does not pretend to educate. It enforces obedience at the level of reflex, rewriting instinct until fear outruns curiosity every time. The rituals vary by institution and by rank of those conducting them, but the goal is always the same. The Psyker must be made predictable. Uncertainty is death. The warp does not forgive hesitation, and neither does the Imperium. Incantations are spoken in High Gothic, their meaning less important than their cadence, which serve to anchor reality while the Psyker's mind is forcibly reshaped. Sigils are branded into flesh, each one a reminder that survival now depends on adherence to a script written by others. There is a moment during sanctioning when many Psykers break. Not outwardly, internally. It is a realization that this process is not meant to end, that there is no version of service where the leash comes off. Control is not a temporary measure until mastery is achieved. Control is the mastery. The Psyker is not being trained to wield the warp freely. They are being trained to survive it just long enough to be useful. Those who fail this realization react differently. Some thrash, triggering restraints that end their lives without ceremony. Others go still, their minds withdrawing so completely that the rituals find nothing left to shape. These Psykers are declared unsuitable and removed. Their fate is not discussed. What matters is that the process continues uninterrupted. There are always more candidates waiting. For those who endure, the aftermath is a hollow clarity. The warp is still there, still vast and hostile, but it feels further away, muffled by layers of imposed structure. The Psyker learns to channel power through prescribed forms, never directly, always mediated by symbols, gestures, and pain avoidance reflexes. Every sanction act carries a warning embedded within it. Go no further. This is as much as you are allowed. The Imperium calls this salvation. A Psyker who survives sanctioning is no longer an uncontrolled liability. They are cataloged, classified, and assigned potential roles. They may become battlefield assets, astropathic relays, or something more obscure and terminal. The distinction does not matter yet. What matters is that they are now owned. The Psyker is given new identifiers, rank markings, control devices integrated into flesh or armor. In some cases, a handler is assigned, someone whose sole purpose is to watch for deviation and act without hesitation if it occurs. Trust is not extended. It is simulated through proximity and threat. The Psyker understands this immediately. Survival depends on never forgetting who holds the trigger. Externally, nothing appears wrong. The Psyker walks, speaks when spoken to, performs assigned tasks. Internally, every moment is a balancing act. The warp presses constantly, testing the boundaries imposed upon it. Every use of power feels like standing on the edge of a blade, aware that one misstep will result in annihilation. This is not mastery. It is endurance dressed up as discipline. The final lesson of sanctioning is the cruelest. The Psyker is shown examples of failure, sanitized recordings, ruined bodies, entire units destroyed by a single lapse in control. The message is unmistakable. If you fail, you will not simply die. You will take others with you. Guilt becomes a final chain, stronger than any ward. The Psyker learns to fear themselves more than the Imperium ever could. When sanctioning ends, the Psyker is led away not with congratulations, but with instructions. They are alive. They are controlled. That is all the Imperium requires. Whatever humanity remains is incidental, tolerated only so long as it does not interfere with function. And as the Psyker steps into their assigned role, carrying the weight of power they are never allowed to trust, they begin to understand the truth hidden beneath the rituals. The Imperium does not save Psykers from damnation. It simply teaches them to walk toward it in a straight line. Service begins immediately. There is no period of adjustment, no space given for the sanctioned Psyker to reconcile what has been done to them with what is now expected of them. They are deployed while the scars are still fresh, while fear still outweighs memory. This is intentional. A Psyker who has not yet learned to imagine alternatives is easier to aim on the battlefield. The warp feels closer than it ever did during the awakening. Not louder, not clearer, but nearer, like a predator pacing just beyond a thin wall. The sanctioned Psyker learns to open that wall in precise, measured increments, never wide enough to invite attention, never narrow enough to fail the task. Each use of power is accompanied by pain, not always physical, but cognitive, a tightening pressure that punishes deviation before it can fully form. The warp is not something they wield. It is something they negotiate with under threat. Astronomican officers treat Psykers with careful distance. Orders are given clearly, never emotionally. Praise is rare. Fear is constant. The Psyker can feel it radiating from the ranks, a low, steady tension that sharpens whenever they step forward. To the soldiers, the Psyker is both asset and liability, salvation and potential executioner. Commissars watch closely, hands resting near sidearms calibrated to end the Psyker's life in a single shot. The message does not need to be spoken. If control falters, mercy will not follow. Between engagements, the Psyker is isolated. Rest is permitted, but privacy is not. Control mechanisms hum softly even in sleep, reinforcing boundaries that must never relax. Dreams are monitored, emotional spikes flagged. The Imperium does not trust stillness. Stillness invites thought, and thought invites questioning. Better to keep the Psyker tired, focused, and afraid. Some Psykers learn to take comfort in routine. The repetition of sanctioned acts creates the illusion of safety. Others become hypervigilant, dissecting every sensation for signs of corruption. Both responses are acceptable. What is not acceptable is curiosity. A Psyker who wonders what they could do if allowed more freedom is already approaching execution in spirit, if not yet in fact. Failure is swift and absolute. When a sanctioned Psyker loses control, there is no attempt at rescue. Containment teams act immediately, flooding the area with null fields, executing the Psyker before the warp can take full advantage of the breach. Survivors are briefed, reassigned, and ordered to forget. Forgetting is as much a duty as obedience. The Imperium cannot afford witnesses who linger on the details. Those Psykers who endure long enough are reassigned according to utility. Some are pulled from the front lines and bound into astropathic choirs, their minds permanently linked to others in configuration that blurs individuality into function. Others are transferred to institutions whose purposes are never fully explained. The Psyker learns not to ask. Questions create friction, and friction invites scrutiny. With time, the fear changes again. It becomes quieter, heavier, less panic, more resignation. The Psyker no longer imagines escape. They imagine efficiency, how to survive longer, how to make fewer mistakes, how to reduce the chances that today will be the day they are deemed expendable. This is the Imperium's final refinement. The Psyker internalizes their own disposability. And yet, beneath the layers of conditioning, something stubborn remains. A flicker of awareness that what is being demanded is not heroism, but consumption. The Psyker is being burned slowly, measured out in sanctioned increments, each act of service shortening whatever future they might have had. The Imperium calls this duty. The Psyker feels as erosion, as deployments stack and losses accumulate. The Psyker begins to sense where all of this is leading, not metaphorically, logistically. There are patterns in reassignment orders, in survival projections. In the quiet way certain Psykers are diverted away from conventional service once their stability begins to fray. They are not being retired. They are being redirected. The Imperium does not waste resources. And Psykers, like all resources, are most valuable at the moment they are finally spent. The reassignment arrives without ceremony. A data slate update, a change in escort detail, a destination that is spoken only once and never explained. By this stage, the Psyker has learned that questions do not extend life expectancy. They comply, because compliance is the only skill that has ever been rewarded. Whatever role awaits them next will not be chosen for mercy, but for efficiency. Astropathic choirs are not places so much as conditions. Vast chambers carved into the bedrock of imperial worlds, lined with sigil-etched pylons and resonance cages that hum at frequencies designed to keep minds aligned and subdued. When the Psyker enters for the first time, the sensation is overwhelming. Not the warp itself, but proximity. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of sanctioned Psykers bound together by force and ritual, their thoughts brushing against one another, whether they wish it or not. Individuality blurs immediately. Privacy ceases to exist. The choir functions through shared suffering. Each Psyker contributes a fragment of themselves to maintain coherence, pain distributed across the group, so no single mind collapses too quickly. Messages are not spoken. They are impressed, burned into consciousness, and hurled to the Imperium toward distant worlds that will never know the cost of receiving them. The Psyker feels their identity stretched thin as it is used as conduit and anchor, their sense of self eroded by constant contact with others who are equally unstable, equally afraid. Blindness comes early. It is not a side effect. It is an inevitability. The strain of perceiving the warp at this scale sears optic nerves beyond recovery, leaving astropads sightless long before their bodies fail. The Imperium treats this not as tragedy, but as acceptable wear. Sight is unnecessary for function. Thought is what matters, and even that is valued only while it remains intact. In moments of rest, if such a concept still applies, the Psyker listens to the others breathe, cry, whisper prayers that overlap until they lose meaning. Some cling to faith, believing that their suffering serves a higher purpose. Others abandon belief entirely, existing only from transmission to transmission, each one stripping away a little more of what they used to be. The choir does not ask for unity. It enforces it. Beyond the choirs lie deeper roles, spoke of only in fragments and liturgical euphemism. Power sources, anchors, stabilization nodes. Psykers reassigned here do not return. Official records mark them as transfer to sacred duty, a phrase that functions as a tombstone without requiring a body. Those who hear the whispers understand what it means. The Psyker has reached the end of logistical usefulness in conventional terms. Now, they will be converted into infrastructure. On Terra, beneath layers of sanctified stone and guarded by the Adeptus Custodes, there are chambers that never appear on public schematics. What occurs there is never described plainly, only alluded to through prayer and omission. Psykers are brought in groups, their identities already stripped, their resistance long exhausted. They are positioned, connected, integrated into systems older than most civilizations. Whether they die immediately or slowly is not a distinction the Imperium considers relevant. What matters is continuity. The Psyker feels it even if they never see it. A pull towards something vast and consuming. A gravitational pressure that dwarfs even the warp's constant roar. Some interpret this as proximity to the Emperor's presence, filtered through layers of ritual and belief. Others experience only annihilation, the sense of being unraveled and repurposed at a scale too large to comprehend. Both interpretations are permitted. Neither is confirmed. What is undeniable is the function. Psykers are burned to maintain communication across the Imperium, to guide vessels through the void, to sustain mechanisms humanity no longer fully understands but cannot afford to lose. They are not honored individually. They are honored collectively, as fuel made sacred through repetition. The Psyker's life becomes a unit of measure, spent incrementally or all at once depending on demand. This is the stage no recruitment sermon ever mentions, where service stops resembling duty and begins to resemble consumption. The Imperium does not hide this truth because it fears outrage. It hides it because there will be no outrage. The machinery of survival has been normalized so completely that even this feels inevitable. As the Psyker settles into this final phase of usefulness, whether as a voice in a choir or a presence in something deeper and darker, a realization surfaces with brutal clarity. They were never meant to be saved. They were meant to be used until nothing remained. And somewhere far above, worlds continue to receive messages. Fleets continue to navigate the void, and prayers continue to be answered, never knowing the price paid in silence beneath their feet. What remains of the Psyker after prolonged service in the choirs is difficult to describe in human terms. Identity erodes unevenly, not as a clean loss, but as a gradual thinning, like a voice stretched too far across too great a distance. Memories surface without context. Emotions arrive detached from origin. Joy becomes rare. Not because it is forbidden, but because there is no longer enough self left to contain it. Pain, however, persists. Pain remains useful. The Imperium maintains careful records of acquired degradation, not out of compassion, but optimization. There is a point at which a Psyker's output declines sharply, when coherence falters and transmissions become unstable. Before this threshold is reached, reassignment is triggered. The Psyker is removed from the choir quietly, replaced without ceremony. The remaining members are instructed to refocus, their loss absorbed into the collective hum. Grief is inefficient. The choir cannot afford it. For those diverted from the choirs, the path narrows further. They are brought into chambers where even prayer feels inadequate. Space is saturated with null fields and layered wards that suppress thought as much as power. Here, Psykers are not asked to transmit or interpret. They are asked to endure. Their presence stabilizes systems whose operation teeters constantly on the edge of collapse. Their suffering is not incidental. It is the mechanism by which balance is maintained. Some of these Psykers are conscious throughout the process. Others are kept in states of induced trance, their minds cycling through controlled loops to prevent catastrophic feedback. Consciousness, when permitted, becomes another resource to be rationed. Too much awareness increases distress. Too little reduces efficacy. The Imperium calibrates this balance with the same detachment it applies to reactor output or void shield harmonics. There are whispers, passed only in the most private moments, about the scale of these sacrifices, about how many Psykers are consumed each day to sustain the Imperium's infrastructure. The numbers are never confirmed. They do not need to be. The sheer breadth of Imperial space implies the truth more clearly than any statistic could. Survival at this scale demands fuel, and Imperium has decided that minds are an acceptable source. Faith smooths the edges of this reality. Ecclesiarchal sermons speak of willing martyrs and divine purpose. Litanies frame consumption as transcendence. Even the Psykers themselves are encouraged, when they are encouraged at all, to interpret their suffering as closeness to the Emperor. Some cling to this belief desperately, because the alternative is to accept that their life has been reduced to function alone. Others abandon belief entirely, retreating into numb compliance that makes the process easier for everyone involved. The Adeptus Custodes, standing eternal watch over Terra's deepest sanctums, do not comment on what they guard. Their silence lends weight to every rumor, without confirming any of them. To those who glimpse these chambers briefly, escorted and restrained, the presence of the custodian guard does not feel reassuring. It feels final. Whatever happens here is not subject to appeal, reinterpretation, or mercy. It is necessity made manifest. At this stage, the Psyker's fear is no longer of death or damnation. It is of meaninglessness. To be consumed without even the dignity of individual recognition, to vanish into a system that will not remember your name, is a quieter horror than any demon could offer. And yet, this is the fate the Imperium has decided is preferable to chaos. Countless anonymous deaths instead of a single uncontrolled catastrophe. As the Psyker's consciousness thins to a thread, there are moments, fleeting and unreliable, where something like understanding surfaces. Not clarity, but pattern. The realization that the Imperium has constructed an economy of suffering so vast that no one within it feels responsible. Every official follows procedure. Every priest recites approved words. Every system functions as designed. There is no villain to curse, no hand to strike away. Only a machine that runs on people and calls itself holy. The final transition is rarely witnessed. A reading spikes. A threshold is crossed. The Psyker's output collapses. Their body fails, or their mind finally fragments beyond usefulness. The system adjusts automatically, routing around the loss. Somewhere, a replacement is already in transit. The Imperium does not pause. It cannot afford to. If there is any comfort to be found, it exists only in the scale of anonymity. The Psyker's suffering does not stand out. It blends into a constant background of sacrifice that sustains humanity's flickering presence in a hostile galaxy. The price is terrible, but it is paid so continuously that it becomes invisible. And as the last remnants of the Psyker dissolve into function, the question they never had the luxury to ask lingers unanswered. Not whether the Emperor needed them, but whether anyone ever needed to know what it cost. There is no ceremony when a system learns to depend on suffering. Dependence does not announce itself with banners or confessionals. It arrives quietly, normalized by repetition, hidden beneath layers of prayer and procedure until it feels as ancient and immovable as gravity. By the time the Imperium begins to speak of Psykers as necessary, the word has already been emptied of morality. Necessary does not mean good. It does not mean just. It means unavoidable. And in Imperium, unavoidable things are rarely questioned for long. Across countless worlds, citizens live entire lives without ever seeing a Psyker. They hear astropathic messages arrive with perfect clarity. They watch voidships translate safely through the Imperium. They kneel in temples and believe the Emperor's light still reaches them. The machinery behind these miracles remains invisible by design. The Imperium understands that distance breeds obedience. If the cost is abstract enough, it becomes acceptable. Within the administratum, Psykers exist as figures in tallies and projections, attrition rates, stability curves, replacement intervals. These numbers are reviewed with the same detached focus applied to ammunition expenditure or Prometheum reserves. No one involved believes themselves cruel. Cruelty implies intent. This is logistics. The Imperium survives because it is willing to think in aggregates, to trade individual horror for collective continuity. Psykers are not singled out because they are hated. They are singled out because they work. This framing is taught early to those who serve near these systems. Compassion is permitted only insofar as it does not interfere with output. A Psyker who falters must be corrected, not comforted. A Psyker who fails must be replaced, not mourned. The emotional distance is not an accident. It is a skill cultivated and rewarded. Those who cannot maintain it are reassigned or removed. The Imperium does not punish empathy. It simply finds it inefficient. Even among the Psykers themselves, this logic takes root. After years of service, many begin to measure their own worth in terms of function. How many transmissions can still be sustained? How long stability can be maintained? Whether reassignment looms. Identity narrows to performance metrics, because performance is the only language the Imperium responds to. This internalization is perhaps the most complete victory of the system. The Psyker no longer needs to be convinced of their expendability. They have accepted it. There are moments, rare and tightly controlled, when this framework is challenged. A malfunction exposes a cost too clearly. A catastrophic choir failure ripples outward, severing communication across sectors and forcing the Imperium to confront the fragility of its infrastructure. In the aftermath, investigations are conducted, protocols revised, safeguards reinforced. The conclusion is never that the system is wrong. The conclusion is that it must be made more resilient, more Psykers, stronger suppression, tighter controls. The answer to suffering is always more suffering, applied more efficiently. Religious language smooths what logistics cannot. The ecclesiarchy speaks of sacrifice as sacred, of chosen souls elevated through service. These sermons are not lies in simple sense. They are reframings, narratives designed to make endurance bearable. Many Psykers cling to these interpretations because the alternative is despair without outlet. Faith becomes insulation, not against pain, but against the knowledge that the pain serves no personal redemption, only continuation. Rumors circulate, as they always do, about whether the Emperor is aware of this cost. Some claim that he suffers alongside every soul burned in his name, that their pain strengthens him even as it destroys them. Others whisper that his awareness, if it exists at all, is too vast and fractured to perceive individuals any longer. These thoughts are never endorsed. They exist in the margins of belief, allowed to persist because they change nothing. Whether the Emperor knows or not, the Psykers continue to be consumed. This is the Imperium's most enduring contradiction. It claims to cherish humanity above all else, yet it survives by feeding upon it, not indiscriminately, but selectively, with bureaucratic precision. The Psyker is both protected and destroyed, elevated and erased. The system insists these states are compatible. It insists that necessity absolves contradiction. From within this framework, alternatives feel dangerous. To imagine a different way of surviving would require admitting that this one is not inevitable. And inevitability is the Imperium's strongest defense against guilt. As long as the price is framed as unavoidable, no one must answer for it. The Psyker becomes not a victim, but a component, and components do not demand justice. The tragedy is not that the Imperium does this. The tragedy is that it cannot imagine not doing it. The galaxy is too hostile, the stakes too high, the memory of catastrophe too deeply ingrained. Every attempt to loosen the system risks collapse. Every hesitation invites disaster. In this environment, cruelty becomes conservative and mercy becomes radical. As the Psyker's life is reduced to another line in a ledger, another unit of fuel consumed in the name of survival, the Imperium continues on, vast and grinding, convinced of its own necessity. It does not celebrate the cost. It simply accepts it. And in that acceptance, something essential is quietly surrendered, traded away not for victory, but for the right to endure one more day in the dark. There is a point at which necessity stops feeling like a choice and starts behaving like gravity. No one wakes up in the Imperium and decides that Psykers should be broken, spent, and forgotten. That decision was made long ago, layered beneath 10,000 years of survival, doctrine, and fear. What remains is momentum. A civilization so vast that it can no longer distinguish between what it does because it must, and what it does because it has forgotten how to stop. For the Psyker still conscious enough to reflect, this realization arrives late, when resistance has already been trained out of them. They begin to understand that their suffering is not an exception to imperial cruelty, but one of its most refined expressions. Other citizens are ground down by labor, war, and deprivation. Psykers are ground down by purpose. Their pain is not a byproduct. It is a mechanism by which the Imperium maintains coherence in a universe that would otherwise tear it apart. This understanding does not bring clarity or peace. It brings a quieter kind of horror. The Psyker sees that there is no individual malice driving their fate, no singular tyrant to blame. Every official involved believes themselves justified. Every ritual is sanctioned. Every death is logged, reviewed, and absorbed into projections that ensure the system continues to function. Responsibility dissolves across layers of authority until it belongs to no one and everyone at once. In this way, the Imperium protects itself from guilt as effectively as it protects itself from demons. Guilt requires proximity. It requires seeing the cost clearly and choosing to pay it anyway. The Imperium ensures that very few people ever see the whole picture. Astropaths do not see the battlefields their messages enable. Soldiers do not see the choirs that guide their fleets. Citizens do not see the Psykers burn to keep the lights of faith alive. Each role is isolated, compartmentalized, and justified on its own terms. The Psyker, uniquely, feels the whole system pressing down on them. They feel the hunger of the warp, the pressure of imperial control, and the expectations of a civilization that cannot survive without their continued destruction. They are told they are chosen, but choice implies consent. They are told they are honored, but honor implies remembrance. In truth, they are necessary in the same way fuel is necessary, not because it is valued, but because it burns. As their usefulness wanes, the Psyker senses the closing of options long before it is officially recorded. Stability checks fail more often. Recovery takes longer. Reassignment orders arrive with increasing frequency. There is no fear in this stage, only an exhausted awareness that the end will not be dramatic. There will be no final stand, no revelation, no acknowledgement of what has been given. There will only be a threshold crossed and a system adjusting to compensate. The Imperium will continue. Messages will still cross the void. Ships will still find their way through the immaterium. World will still kneel and pray and believe they are protected. The Psyker's absence will register only as a minor fluctuation, corrected by another arrival already en route on a black ship somewhere far away. If there is an indictment here, it is not shouted. It does not accuse. It observes. A civilization that survives by consuming its most vulnerable minds does not do so because it is evil, but because it is afraid. Afraid of the warp. Afraid of collapse. Afraid of remembering a time when things were different and wondering whether they could be again. Fear, sustained long enough, becomes policy. The terrible price Psykers pay is not hidden from the Imperium. It is simply amortized across eternity until it no longer feels terrible at all. It becomes background noise, a constant hum beneath the machinery of survival. The Psyker's life is shortened, broken, spent, and erased so thoroughly that even the question of whether it was worth it feels out of place. And yet, that question lingers, precisely because the Imperium never asks it, not whether humanity could survive without Psykers. That answer is already known. But whether a humanity that survives this way can still claim to be saving itself, or whether it has simply learned how to make its own destruction sustainable. The Imperium calls this necessity. The Psykers call it everything